Okay, well, it is 12:05, and I think it's just us. So we can go ahead and get started. Usual format, we'll do names, pronouns, and the icebreaker, which for today will be, since it comes up in one of the poems, if you could have any superpower, what would it be and why? I'll go first as always. My name is Jonathan. Pronouns are he, him. And I'm really tempted to copy the author of the book and say, duplicate myself, but I'm not going to take that cop out. So I will say invisibility. I think it just sounds so freeing to imagine myself like moving throughout the world without like a fear of being perceived or without anxiety or like all of the horrible stuff that can come with like being around people sometimes. So I'll definitely say that. Okay. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Saul. I use he, him pronouns. And if I were to have a superpower, uh, I wish, honestly, just to have them all. I wish to have a lot of superpowers. But if I had to choose just one, maybe I would choose teleportation to be able to go anywhere, whenever I wanted. I think that would be super cool.
I can go. My name's Michael. I use he, him pronouns. And I always say shapeshifting when I get this question. So I could just shapeshift into something that has any of the other powers. That way I can like get them all at once. Like if I want to be invisible, just shapeshift into a wall or something. Or if I want to fly, shapeshift into a bird. Um, so that's always my answer there.
All right, I guess it's me now. So my name is Valerie. My pronouns are she, her. If I could have any superpower, I would say I would want to understand every language on the world in the world and be able to speak in all languages. Um, and when I say this, I mean like just not just the like the spoken language, but then also the ability to perceive correctly and like on both sides. I don't know if that makes sense, but like to because sometimes the things we say and how other people understand them is shaped by their worldviews. So just being able to translate that and to get it right for everyone in the world, that would be my superpower.
Um, my name's Arian. I go by any pronouns, and I usually go with shapeshifting, but since Michael already did that, I'll go with teleportation. Because I could avoid being late, and I could just travel anywhere in the world, like in a snap of a finger. So yeah.
Wow, we'd make the best little superhero team if we all had powers. Okay, well, to get us started, I will ask, what did everyone think of this month's poetry collection? Black Queer Hoe by Brittany Black Rose Capri. Also, I should say the author is very clear. Their name is pronounced Britteney, not Brittany. So if you could remember that, that'd be great. Okay, what did you all think?
I liked it. It reminded me a lot of another poetry that we did last year from Dennis Smith, who does the forward. Um, and I appreciated just kind of like how I don't want to say informal because it's poetry, but just like maybe how comfortable the tone is in a lot of stuff. Um, and I like in the actual book some of the like inserts of like tweets and like playing around with like format and like font structure and stuff like that all add a lot for me. And I'm really glad that I went back and watched the video that Jonathan put in the Discord, because they're definitely like one of the poems that Britteney is reading. I definitely put the inflection on something in a different place, and it meant something very different when I read it than when she read it. So that was kind of cool to see. But overall, I appreciate it.
I enjoyed the poems as well. I wish that there was more of them since it was a pretty short book. But yeah, like Michael said, I like the insertion of the tweets. A lot of the poems made me laugh as well. Um, so there was a lot of like real, like capturing a lot of emotions within the poems. So I really enjoyed that. I also really liked some of the poems that um, had lines crossed out. I thought that was like a really interesting way to write a poem that I had never read before. So I enjoyed all the different things that the author did.
I don't have anything new to add. I also really enjoyed it. I found it surprisingly short. I would have, I would have enjoyed, a few more pages or a lot more pages. And I also found it very like when I was reading. So I read it twice. The first time I read it, I guess in bed trying to fall asleep, and then the second time I went back and read it out loud. This was after I think Jonathan, you sent out the when she was performing some of her poetry. So after that, I went back and just read it, but then like not performing it, just reading out loud to myself, and I found it more impactful that way. But yeah, I really enjoyed the collection. I just wished it was a bit longer.
Um, I really liked the casualness of it. It's like it's not like the typical way people would write poems, I guess. Aside from the casualness, I liked how she just put things out there, if that makes sense. Like, if you get it, you get it. If you know the context and the situation, then you get a clear understanding of it. Um, and I really liked how she really just went in some of these poems. I was like, okay, whoa, wait, that's kind of, she's getting real vulnerable here. And I really like that aspect of the poems. But overall, it was just lukewarm for me. Some poems I liked like a lot, but as a whole, it was okay. It was, yeah.
Okay, I'm a bit torn here. Hmm. Like a lot of you said, I do appreciate how open and honest the author was. That's probably my favorite portion of the collection itself. Um, there were a lot of poems that I could like relate to or I could understand, but I do think me being a man and not being a woman, a lot of what she was talking about didn't really connect for me. I mean, obviously, she's going to have much different experiences as a queer woman than I will as a queer man, but I just think I felt very disconnected from a lot of it. Um, but I will say that I think after watching the video of her performing some of the poems in the collection, I think this book, at least for me, would have really benefited from an audiobook, which, as far as I know, is not available, or at least some sort of video where the author performs all of the poems. I think just reading them made me feel disconnected. I felt a lot more connected to them as I listened to her perform them. But all in all, it was a decent book. I don't regret reading it, so that says something. I can't say that about a lot of the books we read, but that says something. Okay. I have notes on about 6 or so of the poems out of the, I think, like 40 or so that are in the book. Before I jump into those, does anyone have any poems they're dying to talk about? Or should I just go ahead and go in order?
You can just go ahead.
Okay. Well, I will start with the first poem that stuck out to me, which is titled Zaddy. That I think is poem 3, or at least in my copy, it's poem 3. I'm curious in that poem, at least what the poem made me think of was the like age-old statement, everyone marries their parents, which I think is what the author is talking about in that poem. I'm curious, do you guys all agree with that? Do you think we all marry our parents?
Um, I'll say from personal experience, I don't think so. And I don't know if maybe that's just because I am a queer person and that feels like a very like heteronormative thing to think sometimes, like men idolize their mothers, women idolize their fathers, sort of thing. Um, but no, I cannot imagine intentionally partnering myself with someone that is like either of my parents. And I don't know that that like necessarily rings true in same sex or like inherently queer relationships, but I am like trying to reflect back now that you say that and like put the poem in that context. So it's a new lens that I wasn't considering.
Yeah, I have definitely heard of kind of maybe that. I don't know if it's not necessarily a stereotype, but that kind of narrative about people, marrying their parents. I agree with Michael that I don't think it's always true. Um, Most like in my personal life as well, that maybe even depending on how your parents are, that you might want to choose somebody that's completely the opposite of them. Um, so that to me would seem more realistic. um, and I do think that like I can definitely see where the author was coming from in terms of like maybe really diving into this like use of like daddy for what people do that with their parents, which I honestly have always found a little odd. Um, that is, and it's mostly right that daddy figure, and it's not, to my knowledge, a lot of people are not out here calling people mommy. So it's very interesting to see too, just like this thinking beyond like this parental figure or like putting this parental figure name to somebody that you're in a relationship with. Um, it's a little weird to me.
So yes, I I agree with what you said, so about using the term daddy to refer to your partner and how it's kind of odd to do that, and I've always found it that way too. Um, but I was gonna say that I guess to answer your question, Jonathan. Um, so my thinking is a bit different from what I've heard so far. I do think that in a sense we are all attracted to the things that we've come to understand as love. And so when you're finding a partner or someone you're attracted to, you sometimes find the characters or the qualities that the people who surround you that you consider what they're offering love. those qualities that they show you, or those that they portray, are the same ones you look for or consider to be love in your partner. And in that sense, then if you have a family that you consider to be loving, then you take those qualities and find those in your new partner. I don't know if I'm making any sense there. So in that sense, I would say that in a sense we are attracted to people who portray the same characteristics that we've come to define as love, and that's often foundational from the home, from your family. But I think I wouldn't say that we are attracted to our parents as the author did. I would say that we're like we have a tendency or the likelihood for that to happen. And there's obviously a lot of growing up and healing that happens along the journey as you discover who you are. I think in that sense, then you're able to avoid that, but it's in us.
Okay, that went hard. Like, um, but rather than being attracted to what we come to understand as love, I think it's we become attracted to what we're familiar with instead. Um, the thing is with a daddy, I've never really uh, I've never really had any qualms with the use of daddy because I never use daddy. I use papa. So the whole two terms are entirely separate for me. Um, yeah, I don't think that. Um, actually, scratch that. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, I think I'm going to be the odd man out here and say I do think it oftentimes is true that people do date their parents. Um, just from personal experience, I know I've done that before. I've dated some men who, of course, I didn't do it knowingly, but along along the relationship, and usually oftentimes after the relationship ends, I look back and realize like that man was like a carbon copy of my father. And I think that oftentimes the relationship that we have with our parents and how our parents love us becomes how we think love is supposed to be shown or given or how it's supposed to feel. And I think that goes for the good and the bad of how your parents may love you. Like this author is saying, like her dad, like really rarely ever shows up. Her dad would take days to call back or text back, and she would like seek out men who were doing the same thing. I think that can be an endless cycle until you have the moment where you realize at least in terms of the bad stuff that your parents were doing to you, you realize that those things are wrong and like that's not love. I think then you stop chasing that. I know that happened for me. So I do think oftentimes, yes, whether or not it's a queer relationship or a straight relationship or whatever, you do date your parents, both for better and for worse. But okay, on to the next poem, Bad Feminist. I'm curious, do you guys think that kinks can be problematic?
Um, really hard questions today, Jonathan. Uh, I I will say yes and no. I think that there are some that like really obviously push boundaries of like what is socially acceptable, but I also think that part of that is like the intent behind it. Um, and like how you express that and live that out with whoever you're like involved in this kink with. Because there are obviously some things that are like not cool or just like not okay. Like if you like, I don't know, maybe have like a race play kink and you do it because you are like a racist and it's a way to like live that out and like make yourself feel superior to other people for innate qualities, and like that's not okay. um at least I would say it's not okay, but I don't know. I also know of people that like engage in these kind of things willingly and knowingly and put themselves in those situations because it's like what arouses them for whatever reason. um so I don't know. I don't have a good answer for this one.
Can you say your question again, Jonathan?
Yeah, just based on the poem number 4 in my book, Bad Feminist, and the author is talking about their kink of like being degraded, being called a bitch, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that kinks can be problematic?
I think I'll agree with Michael again. That it really does depend on what it is and even the perception of the person doing it, right? I think to me, it always just comes down to consent between people, um, and within whatever they're doing. But I do think like there are some things to me that seem less okay than others, and the example that Michael used is a perfect example. Um, I think it's interesting to like with the specific topic that the author talked about of like feminism, and then being into this more like submissive part or submissive play. Um, that is an interesting thing to hold at once. Um, but again, like that to me doesn't make her a bad feminist. Um, but maybe to other people, they would be like, how could you engage in this and still call yourself a feminist? But I don't think that feminism always means that women or femme identifying people are supposed to be these strong figures, and that they, can't enjoy whatever they enjoy. So, um, to me that's definitely a duality to it all, that maybe even in being submissive they strengthen that, um but I do think that it's an interesting topic to kind of dissect.
Yeah, for me, this is a very tricky question. I think a conversation like this requires a lot of nuance. Um, Using the example that Michael used of race play, I will say that I'm not generally someone who believes in kink shaming. I oftentimes tend to believe that as long as it's between like consenting adults, then have at it. But I do think that there are some kinks that should be shamed, race play being one of them. I will also say age play being one of them, and like rape fantasies. I think if you like that, you should be ashamed of yourself. Um, just because these are things that like actually are traumatizing and hurting people every single day in real life. And the fact that you can get off on that in your bedroom to me is very strange, but whatever. Um, I think that yes, kinks can be problematic. I can't speak from the feminist perspective. I'm not a woman, so I don't know how it feels to say something like the author said in their first poem, if you call me a bitch, I'll cut you. But also in your bedroom, you like being called a bitch while your male partner shoves his dick down your throat. I just don't really know how it feels to hold space for those two things, but I guess that's problematic. And then I'm thinking, in terms of feminism, if I was this author in this situation, I would be more curious how my male partner is perceiving it. Like, does he actually view me as less than him when he's doing these things to me? Um, that would kind of be where the line crosses for me being, for where it becomes problematic for me. What are his thoughts while he's doing these things to me? Um, and I guess just pulling from my own life, I'm someone who likes a lot of kinky things. I don't think anything I like is problematic. I hope not. But I will say that there are some kinks I refuse to engage with people who are white. I just think, I don't know, for me, at a certain point, I can't look past like the racial history and like letting you do certain things to me or me doing certain things to you. I just can't really allow myself to relax enough to feel comfortable in that situation. But that's just my experience. Before I move on, Arian or Valerie, do you guys have anything you want to share?
Nothing that you guys haven't already put down, but whenever I read this title, I could only think of that scene in Fleabag, where she whispers, "We're bad feminists." Aside from that, yeah.
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay. So moving on to the poem Queer Enough, which in my book is poem 12. Um, this poem really made me think a lot. And one of the primary things I thought of is what exactly does queerness mean? And then I guess a follow-up to that would be, is queerness just a sexuality or is there more to it than that? Um, what do you guys think of that?
I can go, but if someone is dying to talk, you are free to cut me off. Um, but when I think of queerness, I do tie it to like sexuality or gender identity. Um, and I think that like especially like in this book club when we like talk about queerness and reflect on it, it is part of that like shared lived experience of um, having something there that is like different from the norm and how how you work through that and how you find community and other people that are doing the same. Um, but even if it is like tied to um, like sexuality or gender identity, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to express those things to like have a queer experience. Like thinking to like what Britteney is saying, like oh, like I like messed with some girls, but doesn't feel like enough to like call myself really, really pansexual or queer or whatever. I think that just like owning that part of yourself is a huge part of it. Um, but I don't know. I don't know that I could like classify think of something in the same way, or maybe I just like would need a new word for it or a new sort of like framework or definition. Because there's definitely like the idea of like being queer as in like just being like odd or different, or like having a little bit more of a struggle to like find your place and find your comfort zones. But I don't like equate that to the same thing as like the quote unquote like queer experience for like LGBTQIA friends.
So I don't really think I can give an answer to this one. I don't have that experience. I'm not queer. So I feel like I should probably just sit back and listen.
For me, yeah, great question, Jonathan. Yeah, it's interesting to think about because, like, I do tie being queer to sexuality and gender identity, like Michael said, but there's also queer culture, which goes beyond just like sexual encounters or whatever it might be. There's queer icons who are not queer themselves. So that is always interesting to me when someone's declared a queer icon and they're not queer. um, but it makes sense, right? Like, it just makes sense. But I do think that there is a limiting factor to try to describe what queerness is. Like, when you start to describe or attempt to describe queerness, you inherently are limiting what it means. And I think that there is so much within this like umbrella term, which is why I like using queer to like describe myself. Because I feel like other labels maybe are just not expansive enough. So I do find it interesting when there's a struggle to like maybe, label yourself because these you don't feel like the author doesn't feel queer enough to call herself queer. And I have seen that be an issue with like other people in the community that I've spoken to who maybe are queer, pansexual, bisexual, whatever it might be, but then are in straight relationships. So they find it very hard to be part of the queer community or to feel accepted by the queer community. Um, but just by being in a straight relationship doesn't mean that they are not longer queer, and that they're no longer attracted to different people or all kinds of people. Um, so it's interesting to see because I've definitely had arguments with friends about this, um, of friends saying like, oh well, how can this person call themselves queer or gay if they've never been in a queer or gay relationship? But we're not asking the same for straight people. We're not saying how can this person be calling themselves straight if they've never been, in a relationship yet. So that's really odd to me. Um, so I definitely understand where the author is coming in as to like how can I call myself queer, because it seems like she mostly has had relationships with men. So this struggle, that I see from the author of really trying to say maybe feel more validated in their queerness or in her queerness, um, because maybe she hasn't had those sexual encounters.
All right, work. So, um, I've never really given it much thought, um, but listening to Saul, yeah, I agree. But I, I like don't think queerness is like a sexuality per se, but I do think it's intimately tied to the LGBT experience. So I guess that's why I do find it odd when straight people call themselves queer. But like you said, it's not like they have to prove it, um, I guess. But yeah, yeah.
When I think of queerness, I don't really think of sexuality. I mean, sure, to a certain degree, I do think of sexuality, but not really. Queerness for me is more about community. For me, I separate someone who is queer versus someone who, let's say in a man's case, a man who's just gay. A gay person is just a man who likes other men. A queer person, I think that is something that's a lot more political. You are someone who is willing to truly be a part of the queer community, truly uplift people who don't look like yourself. I think in today's climate, I'm thinking a lot about like trans rights. A queer person cares about trans rights. A gay man doesn't really care. He's more concerned with his rights. Um, so that's what queerness is for me. But I don't know. And also, I think I may have a different perspective because I'm a bit younger. I know gay men of older generations hate the term queer. Um, I'm not totally sure why, but I have heard a lot of gay men like who will never let anyone call them queer, because I think because when they were growing up, queer was like a bad thing, versus now us like younger gays, we use it like all the time. Similar to like some people who use the F slur, it's like it's okay with them, but like for someone from my generation, like I don't use that word really. But I don't know. And I like that. So you brought up bisexuality and pansexuality because that's where I was going to go next. Um, this poem also made me question, are there certain privileges to being bisexual or pansexual in this author's case that you don't experience if you are just like gay or a lesbian or whatever? What do you guys think of that?
I mean, I do think there is a little bit of truth in like people that have what appear to be heterosexual relationships. Like maybe it's two bisexual or pansexual people of like opposite genders, or something like that. That there is a little bit more privilege and like less discrimination or second guessing that they have to go through that a lot of other people will. So there is a tiny bit of privilege there.
I agree, and I think it's all like in the perception of the current world, that there's a lot of hate towards queer relationships or gay relationships, lesbian relationships, where in public people just face um, like harassment. So there is definitely just a ease of being able to relax in public when you are in a straight passing or seemingly straight relationship, that you could be a queer individual, um, but the relationship that you present or however you present in the world is perceived a certain way by the outside world that then gives you some protection. And I think that's true for my own relationship, that I have a girlfriend. So when we're out in public, it very much is, um, like I mean, I sometimes feel unsafe because I'm also trans. So I'm like, can people tell or not? But just the fact that I am dating a woman, does give me a sense of comfort in that. That I do feel like people are not necessarily staring because of this relationship. And I do feel safer in that. So I definitely agree with that there's some privileges. And I did want to add, Jonathan, I really liked what you said about like the term queer being more political, and it just made me think of the term Chicano, which is, sometimes people use it to describe themselves either Mexican American, but to me, that is inherently a political term. That if you describe yourself as a Chicano, that you're very much like for the people, that you're like actively and like civically engaged. Which to me is maybe not a lot of people see it that way, but because of where the historical time of when the term Chicano came about and why people initially did start calling themselves Chicano, that to me is a more political term. So I definitely see that kind of correlation between Chicano and maybe queer as well.
Okay, wow, that was such a in-depth answer. Actually, I don't have much to say about this, but I definitely do think there are some privileges granted to, um, you know, queer het couples. I'm just gonna send a video in the chat that I just like really thought of. It's this joke a creator did, and yeah, it had a lot of discourse regarding it. But yeah, it is what it is, and that's all I could think of when thinking of this.
Okay, so I do have a couple of questions just tied to what you have all been talking about. But before I say that, first I wanted to apologize to Saul. I pronounced your name wrong earlier on, so I just heard from everybody else, and I thought I should probably acknowledge that that was wrong, and I will
No,
pronounce
it's
your name
totally
correctly
okay.
going forward. Sorry?
It's totally okay. I feel like my name is a little bit hard until you hear it a couple times, so no worry about it.
Thanks. And then the other thing I was going to quickly say is I joined this book club because I was hoping to be in a space where, I challenge my own thinking and learn more. And so some of the questions that you ask, I may not be in a position to respond to, but I wanted to say that because this is your space, I hope it's okay that I'm asking questions. If you would rather not, just let me know. Um, so the first thing I was going to say is, Jonathan, when you were talking, I just wondered because you said that queerness is about community and doing the work, right? Doing the work, and I just wondered if were you are you also saying that people can be queer even though they are not like sexually queer? And then, Saul, you were talking about how people have different privileges depending on whether they identify as trans or bi or pansexual. And so I just kind of wondered, how there's usually the hierarchy of like different races. Is there a similar arrangement like in people's minds about queer people? Like, I hope my question's clear. Yeah, but like I said, if you're not comfortable with my questions, please let me know.
Well, first I'll say, Valerie, you're totally welcome in here. I don't judge anyone. I don't care if you're straight or you're queer or you're not a person of color or you are. Everyone's welcome. Our community needs allies as well as actual queer people. So you're totally welcome in here. First, I will say that I'm not sure your question about can someone be queer without being queer sexually? I don't know. I mean, I've never met a straight person who identifies as queer, but I believe so you were saying, or possibly it was Arian, one of you guys was saying that that is a thing. I've never heard of that, so I have never thought of that. Maybe you guys have a better answer to that question than I do. Um, and in terms of hierarchy in the queer community, I don't know. I look at us all as being equal. Um, I guess I've never really thought about it. um, I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I've never thought of that before.
I I do think that there can sometimes be a little bit of a hierarchy of like social privilege, but it just follows other pre-existing hierarchies where like white cisgendered gay men face the least obstacles outside of being queer versus like trans people of color face the most obstacles. And those are kind of in my mind like the two ends of the spectrum. I don't know that I would call it a hierarchy because then I don't know, it kind of like implies that some people are on some like higher level for some reason, and it's not anything that anyone has like earned. It's purely just like innate circumstances that they can't do anything about. But I do think like in terms of in terms of like privilege and access to like move through the world as freely as possible, there are definitely like very different ends depending on where you fall based on your demographics.
Yeah, I also want to maybe echo what Jonathan said, that I'm very happy that you're here, Valerie. I think that all of these questions are really like great discussion topics. So yeah, definitely I'm open to questions. But I agree with what Michael said, that maybe there's not this hierarchy, but there's definitely different risk maybe that people have to live with. Where I think like right now our current political climate is really targeting trans people, so that I think just makes the world less safe for trans people. And in that case, maybe again, not this like hierarchy, but definitely like trans people just have less privilege. And even within that, I think there's levels, right? There's trans people who can transition and pass as cis and never engage with the queer community, and never really maybe not engage with their identity, but make that like one of the four, that they don't tell other people that they're trans, so they get to just live as straight passing, cis passing people. So they definitely have more privilege than people who don't pass, or who don't have the or who don't want to, do whatever to like transition medically, or have all these different things. And I think same with what Michael said, right? That there's these other things that are part of people's lives beyond their queerness, like um, just gay men just being men have certain privileges out in the world. White queer people just have certain privileges out in the world than maybe people of color do. So there's definitely all these different things that people have to balance within their queer identities, that some can be hidden, or some can be pushed forward or backwards to gain more privilege.
I know pretty much what everyone said.
To answer my original question on whether or not bisexuals or pansexuals have privilege, um, I'm going to land on a yes. This conversation always sparks a lot of discourse in the queer community, especially I notice it more around bisexual women. I don't notice as much maybe anger or judgment towards bisexual men, and I'm not sure why that is, but um, when we discuss bisexual women, I know a lot of people, especially lesbians, feel as if they're not really gay. It's all pretend. They're going to be straight one day, blah, blah, blah. Um, so I would look at that. I would look at that as more of a disadvantage than an advantage. I have heard from some of my bisexual male friends that when they enter into straight spaces, especially if they have a girlfriend and they're bringing that girlfriend with them, they automatically are assumed to be straight, and then it almost feels as if people don't want them there because they're trying to quote unquote invade. Um, and I don't know. I mean, I can understand both sides of that. This belief that potentially some queer people have that queerness or a space in the queer community must be earned. I know the author talks a lot in the poem about they haven't been beat up enough, they haven't been called slurs enough, they haven't been targeted enough, or hate crimed enough. Um, but it's also like, I don't know, from my perspective, I don't want people to have to experience those things. So I don't have a sense of like anger or jealousy or whatever for people that don't experience that. I don't know. It's such a difficult conversation to have. I'm not bisexual, so I can't speak to how it feels to navigate through the world as a bisexual person, but I don't know. I think I'll land on yes, they have privileges, and I'll leave it there. Okay. To move on to poem 17 in my book, The Day My Nudes Leak. Reading that in today's climate, I'm reminded a lot of perhaps 5 or 10 or so years ago, where there was this trend of a lot of like women, especially like female celebrities, having their nudes leaked and like how embarrassing and humiliating that at least seemed to be for them. And as I read the poem, I was thinking, as a man, would I be as triggered or upset if my nudes leaked? Um, and I'm curious what you guys think of that. Do you think that men have that same fear of their nudes being leaked, or is that just something that women experience?
I think talking about privileges, I think it really, to me, narrows down to those privileges that when women are open about their sexuality, they're slut shamed, or they're told that they can't have a sexual expression of themselves because it makes them look bad. Whereas if men sexually express themselves, they're often celebrated in that. Um, so that to me is like the difference between the two, where like if a man's news were to leak, right, that people are like, I mean, I think with either gender, people are like, "Oh my god, I want to see." But I think that they that in and of itself is bad for either gender because if the person, I mean, in most situations, it's not that person that's leaking the news themselves. So that to me is an invasion of privacy, and whether, regardless of gender, um, that impact I think is felt by both men and women, of that like breach of their privacy, of their like body not being looked at by strangers without their permission. So I do think that regardless of that, there is like, I mean, to me, that would be like damaging to me regardless. But I do think that there's a different perception then from the public as to like, oh, if a woman's news leak, then that's embarrassing for that woman. But if a man's news leak, then that's a possibility to be like, oh wow, like I don't know, right? Like, oh wow, he has a big dick, so now he like should feel good that like everybody knows he has a big dick. So stuff like that that I think is the difference to me.
Yeah, I'll agree with Soul on this one, that I do think it comes from like a place of what kind of like sexual privilege you have. Um, and like just to answer the general question, does it make a difference for man? I think it depends on the man. Like if it was like a picture of like some gay celebrity with like their butt cheeks spread apart, I think it would get a very different reaction than just like a penis picture from like Justin Bieber or whatever. Um, but that, yeah, I do agree that generally like men have a lot more privilege. Just be like, oh yeah, he, and then it's like kind of celebrated. Whereas it's more of like a badge of shame for women most of the time.
Um, yeah. Uh, Thank you for joining, Valerie. It was really nice having you, by the way, and meeting you. But to answer the question, I would be horrified if my nudes ever leaked. Like whenever I take fresh pics, I constantly check my messages to see if I've accidentally sent them or like um, but sent them before because I've sent pictures without even knowing I did. So I definitely think that uh, the sense of like panic or like an invasion of privacy would be, uh, you know, uh, would apply to both parties. But there's definitely privileges that some men face because when you see the comments on Instagram and it's of an attractive woman, everyone always instantly assumes OnlyFans. And even though that's a different story and that's sex work, it's not really um, leaked nudes, but it's like when women's nudes leak, it's a stain on them rather than when men's nudes leaked. It's like whatever. Like when Drake's nudes leaked, it was more of like a joke. It wasn't really that bad. Um, but yeah, there's definitely privileges that men have compared to women when their nudes leak.
You all bring up something interesting that I hadn't considered, for both men and women, that there may be a sense of shame depending on whether or not your genitals are what could be considered valuable. Like, for example, Saul, I know you brought up like big penises. I'm curious, is there a sense of shame if a man's news leaks and it's small? Um, Same for women. I mean, I know obviously there's a shame whether or not the nudes are quote unquote valuable, but what if she has genitals that are not like the most like aesthetically appealing to people who are into like women's genitals? Um, I had never considered that, but that's a really interesting point to bring up. And I guess to piggyback off of what Arian said, what would your reaction be if your nudes were to leak?
Yeah, to answer your question about, yeah, what if a man did have a small penis, and I think then that might then be more embarrassing for that person because the internet would be relentless about that. So I do think that that is definitely like a different path for that. I would, like Arian, I would also be horrified if my news leak. Like I just would think like immediately that my mom would see them, and I would hate that. I also think, right, when you were taking pictures of yourself, you're like making this fantasy, so that's really embarrassing to then like see that outside of a sexual context, because you know that you're like also putting on this like persona to take the pictures. Yeah, so I would hate that.
Um, I was just gonna say that I'm not sure how I would feel. I would definitely feel violated, because those aren't things that I like. Like I don't take pictures to like share broadly. Um, I know that there are plenty of people that do, and like that's great for them. That's like not a thing that really motivates me. Um, but I'm not sure. I also like have the privilege of like being able to move through like spaces like locker rooms, at gyms, like a body that I guess is like generally accepted or like people don't really like look twice at. So um I don't know that I would like be so much as like embarrassed as I would just be like violated and uncomfortable. And that's really not okay with me. Um but I don't know. I've done like a lot of work to like be very comfortable with my body and appreciate it. So maybe part of that like indifference is coming from that, and that's just like a personal experience or thing that I've had to like put extra work into at certain parts of my life.
I think I've shared this with you guys before, but if I haven't, I'll share it again. Pictures of me I wouldn't use the term leaked because I think that implies a level of celebrity that obviously I don't have. But pictures of me have gone out, been shared, I guess however you want to call it. Um, And I'm thinking back to when that did happen. I don't remember feeling ashamed or humiliated or embarrassed. That was, I think, in a large part because I was much younger then than I am now. I think if it were to happen to me now, I would probably feel those things. And also, another part of it is my face weren't in those photos. Nothing identifiable about me was in them. Um, so I don't know. It almost kind of feels like, I don't know, it feels like no big deal to me for some reason. Um, and also, like Saul said, not to brag or anything, but I don't think I have anything to be embarrassed about. So it didn't feel strange to me, but I think if it were to happen to me now, it would feel humiliating, especially if my face were in them, because obviously I work and I work around like a lot of people, a lot of the public, so I wouldn't want them knowing they could see me naked online. But yeah. Okay, moving on to poem 22, called Titling. This poem was very interesting for me to read. I don't think we get a lot of the quote unquote side chick perspective. So I was kind of like drawn into this a lot. Um, my first question is, do you think someone is allowed to be jealous when they are knowingly having a sexual relationship with someone who is in a romantic relationship with someone else?
This is a little bit of a hard question. I think just because like that other person is engaging too. Like it takes two people. Um, and if they are the ones saying that like I don't value my relationship enough to like keep it there and I have like enough interest and attraction or affection for you to engage with you, then I mean, I don't know if I would say like jealousy is appropriate, but there is like obviously a level of connection or agreement between two people that like does warrant some sort of like I don't know extra communication maybe or extra I don't want to say extra care, but it's like something else there. And I know that's very general. Like some people like what cheat just to cheat or just to like have as much sex as possible or like get as many like hot people in their like number as they can. But um, I don't think that's what's going on based on what I got from Britteney's poem. And I only took titling. I don't see it as like a standalone poem. I really could only like absorb it with the poem before it um, because they go together. Um, but yeah, that's it for me. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that's a hard question because regardless of the situationship or situation that somebody is in, um, they can still get jealous, right? You might be like, sure, this person is like only my fuck buddy, but them also having other people that they're sleeping with can still make you jealous, even if you know that that is the relationship that you agree to. But I do think that this poem definitely goes beyond just that factor, and it really, I think, like to me, the fact that Brittany kept talking about like the girlfriend and like um why the man had to like cancel the the dick appointment, that right to take care of potentially the girlfriend who had a miscarriage, and with the author having other poems where she talks about her fertility or maybe issues with that, perhaps not being able to have a child later in the future. Um, that there's also jealousy about that and not necessarily about maybe him just leaving for the girlfriend, but like leaving for that specific reason that is drawing a lot of jealousy too.
Um, I I didn't think it was uh, too complex to answer. I guess you can't help feeling jealous. You can't help what you feel either. All you can really do is just control it. But I don't think you have the right to be jealous if you're in like a situation where you're cheating. Um, either party is cheating. I guess I can see the argument if they're like, "Oh, I'll leave my partner for you." But even then, it's still, I don't know. At best, I just think of Back to Black by Amy Winehouse. Um, regarding the poem, though, I didn't really take it as jealousy. I read it more as guilt. But I see the jealousy now that it's been brought up. But I saw it as guilt because in the previous poems or further poems, she mentions not being able to have a baby. And there's such an emphasis on the miscarriage throughout the poem that I thought she was feeling guilt that maybe their affair might have caused the stress for the miscarriage or something along those lines. Uh, but yeah, that that is all.
You and Ari and Michael both brought up something very interesting that I hadn't considered. Uh, the jealousy, at least that I felt in this poem, may not be around the guy she's dating being in another relationship with another woman, but the jealousy being about that woman being able to have children when she can't. I hadn't considered that, but now that I think about it, it does make me view the poem in an entirely different light. Um, so thank you. I really like that. And my follow-up question to that question to piggyback off what Arian just said is, should someone who is sleeping with someone in a relationship feel guilty about it? And of course, do you think this author feels guilty about it in their poem?
To me, when I first read this poem, I really didn't see the guilt in the author because it really seemed more like she was being hurt by the man leaving, but right with the other context as well as to why he's leaving. Um, so I didn't feel the guilt, and on whether someone or not should feel guilty, oof, I don't know. I mean, they're not the ones that, or maybe they are, maybe they're seeking people specifically who are in relationships, and in that case, they should feel some type of way for getting, for like maybe wanting that type of relationship. But um, oftentimes, I think it's maybe kind of funny or kind of ridiculous when whoever it is cheats and their partner finds out, and then the partner is mad at the person that their partner is cheating with rather than their partner themselves. Like that is always like weird to me. Like, no, you should be mad at your partner because your partner is the one that's breaking the relationship. This other person, whether they knew or not, is not the one that's cheating. So that is always interesting to me. So I don't know. I definitely would feel guilty if I found out that that was the situation I was in, that it was somebody that was using me to cheat. I would feel guilty and stop that relationship. But some other people don't care. And again, like, I don't think that the blame is necessarily on them. It's rather on that person who is the one that's cheating.
I was gonna start by saying I agree with Saul, but I forget what the original question is, so maybe let me stop before I do that. Do you mind repeating the original question, Jonathan?
Should
I
someone?
know it was like a
Yeah,
second
go ahead.
follow-up question.
Mhm. Do you want the follow-up or the original question about the jealousy?
The follow-up,
Okay.
sorry.
Should someone who is engaging in a sexual relationship with someone who's in a relationship feel guilty about it? And do you feel this author's guilt in their poem?
Thank you for that little jolt that I needed. I don't know. I kind of will stick by my answer from before that, like, it takes two people. And that, like, I have seen this situation that Soul described where, like, one of the people in the relationship is cheating and the person is like more mad at the like outside party than they are with their partner. And I don't get that or like think that's okay. Because both people have to make conscious decisions. And also, like, there has to be something like going on in the relationship. Like, you have to have some sort of like level of like, oh, like my partner is not like fully engaged, or like I find it hard to be like completely oblivious or to like not know your partner well enough to know that that's going on, and then be like really upset at the other person for it. Um, but I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure. I just there's so many like extenuating circumstances, and like what if it's like tied to sexuality and you're like married to a woman but you're like cheating with a man, or um I what if you're like in a sort of like arranged relationship or one that you don't want to be in, like I'm what was our book with Disha and the other man, was it, where like I mean I don't know. I think it depends. So I don't want to give like a general answer. Obviously, it's like not okay to be breaking up relationships, but people aren't always like the most selective or discerning in getting into relationships, and that I think is a bigger problem.
Okay, wait, because I went into this pretty black and white, but that was actually a good point. It depends on the circumstances, but I just think that if the outside party knew and they still willingly engaged, then yeah, both parties should feel guilt and should take the heat or whatever consequences arise. But yeah.
Yeah, you bring up something very interesting, Michael, that I was going to touch on. I think that when we talk about heterosexual relationships, especially, let's say in this author's example, it's between a man and two women he's sleeping with. I think the answer is usually pretty black and white, like, oh, she's in the wrong, she should feel bad, blah, blah, blah. But I think that when we bring in queerness into it, especially with gay men, um, I think a lot of us have experiences of being in relationship with or having sex with or whatever, with men who are in the closet and are oftentimes in straight relationships. And I'm asking myself, should the same level of, I guess, guilt apply to them as it should a heterosexual dynamic? And I don't know. I mean, from my own perspective, I, of course, have never entered into this kind of thing knowingly. but I have been with men who I've later found out have girlfriends or wives or whatever, and I have felt guilty, and I've obviously immediately cut it off. Um, I guess I'm pretty black and white on cheating. I think it's always wrong. Um, but I don't know. I do think that, like Michael was saying, there is a certain level of nuance that has to be had when we bring in sexuality into it. Um, that perhaps straight people don't have to like think about. It's very interesting, Michael. Okay, to move on to poem 27, Micro. Um, I'm curious, what exactly do you consider to be, especially because I think we're all of different ethnic backgrounds, what do you consider to be a racist microaggression? And do you have any personal examples of microaggressions you've experienced?
I think I get more queer microaggressions than race-related microaggressions. And part of that may just be like the privilege of being very racially ambiguous. But one that comes to mind for me a lot, I am not Latino at all. I just like look like it enough, but I'm like very frequently people will just assume that I speak Spanish or speak Spanish to me, or ask me if I speak Spanish. The same happens with Arabic a lot, but I don't. It doesn't feel the same. But that is one that comes up a lot. Um, but I definitely have like experienced microaggressions with like once a boss assumed that I wanted to like help him redecorate his house because I was gay, and I obviously did not want to do that. Just like those, I feel like I experience those kind of things, or maybe clock them more often, or are more aware of them. Um, but that's it. I mean, outside of just like blatantly racist comments, which again are normally directed towards Latino or Middle Eastern people, neither of which I am. Um, but like those kind of things. But I don't even consider this microaggressions. I consider a lot of them to just be like blatantly racist.
I feel like a lot of times, like sometimes, like microaggressions are really around my name, where people like just refuse to attempt to say it correctly, and it's very much of a like, oh, I'm just not even gonna try type of deal that I hear all the time, and I'm like, my name is 4 letters, like it is not that hard to say, so people definitely do that a lot to me. They're just like, oh, that is so hard to say. Um, and that I'm just like, okay, sure, if that's you can't read. Um, there's also like I think what Michael said, like I've also feel like I also get some queer microaggressions, but maybe it's mostly around like being Mexican of people like because I also tell people how I grew up in Mexico and people are just so amazed and comment a lot about the fact that I don't really have an accent. So that also comes up a lot. People just be like, "Wow, and you don't even have an accent. How did you do that?" Type of things.
It's funny because when you ask that question, I know I've had a lot of like instances where I've experienced some microaggressions, but I could barely recall much experiences, which is a good thing, I guess. But then, since I work in like the service sector, um, I talk with a lot of people. Um, I'm, I guess some people, like when I compare to how they talk with my coworkers, sometimes they speak like much slower and like they like really enunciate the word And it's so okay, wow. I can speak English perfectly fine. Thank you very much. Aside from that, I'm very um you can tell I'm gay with one look, like no doubt. So I could definitely relate with um experiencing more um queer or gay microaggressions rather than racial ones.
For me, I think I would define a microaggression, whether it be a queer one or a racist one or whatever. I think it's just any sort of assumption that someone may have of you based on the way you present. Um, I will say that in my own personal experiences, I grew up in Oakland. I've been working pretty regularly since I was about 15 years old, in summer programs, internships, whatnot. So I've been in a lot of job interviews since I was 15 years old. And the microaggression I got the most was, you speak so well, or you write so well. Um, and I think a lot of that comes from obviously being Black, obviously coming from Oakland, and then another part of it being growing up in low income housing. A lot of the early internships I had were through low income housing programs. So going into the interviewer knew my like financial status. And that for me was, I think when I was younger, I thought it was a compliment. Like I took it well. As I got older, I began to realize how racist that is. Like why exactly would you be looking at me knowing where I come from, and then how exactly do you expect me to sound? Um, so yeah, I've had to tell some interviewers off, tell some bosses off. Uh, I don't get that anymore. So I moved past that point in my life. But yes. Uh, In regards to the queer microaggressions, obviously, yes, I've experienced them, but maybe I'm embarrassed to say, like, I have a lot of like stereotypically queer things about me. So, like, while they are meant to be offensive, these queer microaggressions, they're oftentimes true. So I don't really get offended. Um, but I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Um, Now, to move on to poem number 30 in my book, White Daddy. Um, this again made me think a lot. And I think my biggest question I walked away with is, do you think that a proximity to whiteness grants you its privileges? Um, what do you all think of that?
This is one of the poems that I was hoping that we would discuss because I found it really interesting. To answer your question about whether being near whiteness grants you privilege, I think that a lot of people of color wish that was true, and behave as such, right? That there's a lot of people of color who are part of MAGA, and to me it's just self-hate, and they maybe want to be close to whiteness so that they can benefit from it. But I know that MAGA and white supremacists will never look at them as white people, and they will never be at the same in the eyes of, these white supremacists will never be in the at the same level as they are, right? So I think that a lot of people wish that the proximity to whiteness did grant them stuff, and I think it does in some ways. And I think that the this particular poem shows that, right? That, or maybe I use an example of my own. My mom is married to a white guy now, and he is pretty well off. He like owns this business and stuff. So they're both me less now that I don't live at home, but my mom is definitely benefiting from that proximity to whiteness. As and I also feel better about her being out in the world with him because he's also like this very tall, like he's not a threatening looking guy, but he's like this very tall, like can protect my mom type of thing. So I feel better with my mom knowing that my mom is out there in Arizona with a thick accent, very Mexican, next to this white guy. That I think that there is like some protection or some privileges that my mom gets being married to him. Um, that sometimes I am happy that she has him, right? Well, I'm happy for many reasons that she has him, but particularly for these reasons. So I do think that there is some privileges that people get, but it is not to maybe the level that they wish they had.
Yeah. My people at work that do our racial equity training would be very proud of me for remembering a lot of these things. But I do agree that like proximity to whiteness is a benefit, and I think sometimes something that people, I don't want to say strive for, but like maybe reach towards even subconsciously, because there are perks to it. You can, at least in America, like really move through the world, especially like in Solo's example, like being married to a white person, very, very different reactions and perceptions and privileges that you get than if it were like two people of color. So there is definitely some benefit, and even like from my own experience, I am a pretty white passing person of color, and especially like I live in a majority POC city now, and I very much am like assumed to be white a lot of the time, which took a long time for me to like internalize and be like, oh, this is, I guess, like my reality now, because it was very much the opposite when I was growing up. Because I grew up in like a upper 90% white area, and I was very obviously not. Um, but I definitely do get like a little bit different treatment, I think, sometimes than like some of my friends or whoever I'm with, because of that.
In my
Oh,
experience, the- wait, you could go ahead if you want.
no, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. In my experience, proximity to whiteness does grant privilege. Um, I remember attending a party that only had white people in it, and the only reason I was there in the first place was because my friend invited me. It was like it really was a whole different world. Everything was kind of threw me. It threw me off because, um, yeah, it was just so different from what I was accustomed to. It does grant privilege, but I feel like it also does make you more vulnerable in certain spaces. Like I said, I was the only person of color in that party, and I felt like I stuck out like a sore thumb. Uh, Sometimes me and my friend joke that I'm his token Asian or his token person of color. As you know, in gay spaces in particular, they're pretty white centric. And since I live abroad in Melbourne right now, it's like I feel like because I have a white friend, um, that kind of solidifies me as um, I don't know, it solidifies me as a more valid um, immigrant, I guess, because I could assimilate, I could interact, I could mingle uh, with you guys too. Like, look at me, I'm literally so white passing, not white passing, but like, I get the culture, I get the norms, I'm in the know. So I guess, yeah, it does the the proximity does grant privileges, but it also can make you more vulnerable, if that makes sense.
This question for me is very tricky. You all bring up something very interesting. The author is talking obviously about their stepfather being white, but this idea around a proximity to whiteness when you're in an interracial relationship is interesting. I haven't, in my own personal experience, dated outside of my race a ton, but the times where I have, the few times that I have, I don't remember feeling privilege or experiencing a privilege. I guess to be fair, I would never date a white guy who like flexes his privilege a lot. I mean, that wouldn't really do anything for me. I'd probably be very turned off more than turned on, but I don't know. So I don't remember experiencing a level of privilege. I don't have a lot of white friends. I don't never really been in predominantly white neighborhoods or spaces. So I don't know. I think just going off of what the author said in their poem, uh, that yeah, sure. I guess when you're thinking about being with a white person while being pulled over by police, like they do, I don't think it's this poem, but it's the one where they go to Canada. There's a certain privilege there. Your white stepfather being able to speak up to the police officer where your black mother probably couldn't. And he's like respected and listened to. Um, So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But I do agree with Saul. I don't think that a proximity to it is enough to truly make white people accept you, like you used with the example of the MAGA group. I agree. I think that's all BS, and sooner sooner or later, you're gonna realize you're not really a part of their club. But whatever. Okay, now before I move on, is there anything else anyone wants to share? That's pretty much all I have. So have anything else to share? Share it now.
I kind of wanted to talk about like the part of this poem that talks about gentrification and thinking about like what the author is kind of talking about of like maybe one of the questions that she says of like um is it gentrification if he was being priced out of the neighborhood he grew up in because a different type of white people discovered it. So also that nuance, right? That um, in poor neighborhoods, poor white people also exist, and is it gentrification if more poor white people are coming in, or is it gentrification if like a historically black neighborhood is like if that is lower income, now higher income black people are moving into it and it's having the same gentrification effects, but like the racial makeup of the people who are gentrifying is the same as that neighborhood. I'm always interested about that question of like who can gentrify what and like what is it really. Is it mostly just like money based? Is it money and ethnicity? Like, what are the factors that are contributing to that gentrification of certain neighborhoods?
I actually was a little curious about kind of the same thing. And I was wondering too, is it maybe more about like culture being lost in a neighborhood than actual like who is coming in and out? But I think like my city in particular has a lot of very distinct neighborhoods, and a lot of them have like really specific cultural affiliations or have had like historically like the same like kinds of groups or families or people whatever live in them. And the gentrification issue I think is more about that identity and that like sense of belonging with people really close to you being lost, instead of like the person, like maybe the person next door makes 10 times as much money, but like you're both from like Somalia or whatever, so you have some sort of like understanding cultural tie that like brings together a neighborhood that's lost when someone comes in that doesn't have that.
Go ahead, Arian.
No, I was just gonna say that I don't really have much to say on this topic, but I agree with Michael when he said that it has to do with identity. But yeah, that's it.
I think I perhaps have a different perspective just living in Oakland like majority of my life. Oakland is a very now gentrified city. Um, I look at gentrification as being more of an extensive process as opposed to like just whites moving into your neighborhood. I think gentrification is about driving up property value. It's about displacing people who have been here for generations. I think it is about reworking and reconstructing neighborhoods to where even people who have been here for generations can no longer afford to live. Um, so when we talk about, let's use the example of a poor white person moving into an Oakland neighborhood, that to me is not gentrification because poor whites don't drive up property value. They don't have the money to do so. And then even if we're talking about like, for example, a rich Black family moves into a lower income Black neighborhood in Oakland, that wouldn't really work either because oftentimes even wealthy people of color don't have enough capital that it would require to reconstruct and rebuild a neighborhood and to displace people. That takes a lot. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know any Black people, rich or not, who could do that. So I don't know. That's just my perspective. But I think it's interesting what you guys brought up. Okay. Anything else before I move on, or can I move on? Okay. Well, since we have one more meeting this month, I won't bring up a book for April, but we can use this time to kind of check in a little bit, which is great because you guys have all been here for a few meetings, so you guys can really give me your opinions. I'm curious, how do you guys feel about when I present like 2 or 3 book options for a month? And we vote on that. Do you guys like that, or would you rather I just choose the book myself and then just assign it?
I honestly don't care either way. I'm here to read wherever's on the list. So I don't necessarily care if you ask for our opinion. It's cool to see like what things you're thinking about, and then for us to have a say. Um, so yeah, I could go either way.
Yeah, I also don't really have a strong opinion. And I will say, like, we've all contributed to the list, so we've all like made input there. So I think it's more for me as long as we're not doing too much like really heavy stuff back to back, or doing too much of like the same thing back to back. The variety and being able to like switch up between like subjects and formats and cultures is really appealing to me. So as long as that keeps up, I don't necessarily care whether we vote on the recommendation or you just pick one from the list.
Very that. Yeah. I don't really have um, a preference, I guess, but the options I think are nice.
Okay. Uh, now I guess I'll ask, what genres do you guys want to see next for the month of April? I have a list of over 400 books, so there's a little bit of everything in it. What genres do you guys want to read next?
There was a meeting that I came to once where you had suggested a book, and then maybe we read that another book that was the one that was kind of like, it was it Impossible Beauties maybe, but the other book that you had suggested was a murder mystery book, and I don't know if we ever ended up reading that. I don't think that we did. Um, But I love murder mysteries, and I don't know if we have done that before, that I would love to read a murder mystery.
Murder mystery sounds really fun. So I'm on board with that. And I will also add that I think, like, in terms of maybe like cultural touch points, I don't know if this is an option, but I don't know if we've really hit on any more like Middle Eastern queer experience, and or like any sort of like Pacific Islander type things. I know we've done. I think I don't want to say all of the other races, but like we've really hit on a lot of other like specific cultural things, and we haven't either of those. So I'd be curious to see if we have anything for those. But definitely like double thumbs up on the murder mystery.
Horror mystery sounds nice. Yeah, I have nothing else to add, really.
Hey, the book you're talking about, Saul, is Razorblade Tears. I've been thinking about that one a lot too. My only hesitance there is picking it for April. We would have just read From the Belly at the end of March, and that's a horror. So I feel like they're kind of similar, which isn't really a big deal to me, but that's one of my like hesitating points. My other is that, as far as I know, that author is straight. Even though he's writing about queer characters, he's not queer himself. And I do try my best to make sure the authors we're reading are queer, but maybe I'll make an exception. I don't know. But since you guys seem interested, sure, why not? Um, Now, to Michael's point, I do have a lot of books on our list actually that focus on Pacific Islander characters or Middle Eastern characters. Actually, I'm not sure how much it would appeal to Michael or any of you. When we read Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki, that is actually a like spin-off sequel of one of her first books, which does take place in Hawaii and does focus on Hawaiian characters. Um, so that's an option. Hmm. That's an option too, if you guys want to think about that. Perhaps in our next meeting, I will present both books and then see where the club lands. So yeah, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Now, on to some unfortunate bad news. I don't know who's heard, but Skype is shutting down. Its last day of operation, I believe, is May 5th, which means, of course, we won't be able to meet here anymore. We'll obviously still be meeting. I'll still continue the club. But this will just mean that we will move on to a different meeting platform. I'm still kind of weighing my options, but I'm like 98% sure that I'm going to choose Microsoft Teams. It just kind of makes the most sense price-wise and with its features. I think a lot of them will come in handy in the future. This won't really make much of a difference to you guys as far as I know. It'll just be meeting on another platform. But I guess just for the sake of transparency, that will be happening soon. I am not totally sure if I will have us wait until our April meeting is over to move on to the new platform or if that will happen in April. I kind of want to stick around in Skype a little bit because I do love Skype. I've been using it for like all my video chatting needs since I was in like middle school. So I don't want to let it go. But on the other hand, I don't really see a point in us waiting around. So I don't know. I'm thinking that I know, end of an era. I'm thinking that I'll probably host our next meeting on Microsoft Teams just so we can all kind of get familiar with it and test it out. And then I guess depending on how that meeting goes, I'll collect feedback and then see if that's the right platform for us or if we should try something else out in April. So yeah, won't make much of a difference to you guys, I don't think, but just for the sake of transparency, that is probably going to happen soon. Okay. that's all I have to discuss for this meeting. Before we go, does anyone else have anything they want to say, share, poems they want to go over, questions they have about this book, the next book, the club, whatever?
I just want to say I unfortunately won't be able to make it to the next meeting. I'm still going to read the book. I always do, even when I can't make the meetings. But I do have work that day. But like I said, whatever book ends up being chosen, I will be happy with that. So, because I know that you said you'll bring the books up next meeting as well. So just know that from my end, whichever book is chosen is fine with me.
Okay. Well, before I let you guys go, I will say I am a little shocked at today's meeting length. Going into it, I didn't have a lot of questions. So I thought uh, it'd be a pretty short meeting, but you guys really shared and went deep and had follow-up questions to my questions. That helped extend the conversation a lot, which I really appreciate. Um, I know Valerie's not here, but she also presented some very good questions as well. So thank you guys for that. And I know I won't see you, Saul, next meeting, but for anyone that comes or doesn't come, thank you for coming today. It, of course, means a lot, especially in this administration. It means a lot that we come to these meetings and really support one another. But until I see you next, take care of yourselves and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for
Bye.
hosting. Toodles.